and welcome to another booktube video from me, Lauren, from Lauren and the Books. I hope you're all very, very well. Today's video, it feels weird to be doing a wrap up because last month I did my reading vlog and sort of wrapped up as I went, which I quite enjoyed doing, and I think I'm probably going to do it in September as well. But this is a mid-month wrap up, so this is talking about the books that I've read so far this month, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books, plus one that I didn't get to wrap up at the end of last month because I'd already finished doing all the wrap-ups. I won't bore you with the logistics of it, but that's what happened. So yeah, 7 books to talk about. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus 2 audiobooks. It's all coming together. And I'll start with the book that I finished in July, which is Conversations on Love by Natasha Lunn. This is a proof copy of it. That's why, really, you read it this way, but the proof copy looks like this way. This wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. I will say I'll keep this brief because I was talking about this as I was reading it in July during the reading vlogs. But here it says a celebration of love in all its forms, featuring conversations with and lists a whole host of very exciting people like Candice Carty-Williams, Diana Evans, Roxane Gay, Philippa Perry, Dolly Alderton, and also other people who are not mentioned that I was excited to hear from, like Juno Dawson and what's the name of the one that I read last year, Purna Bell, talking about love in all its different forms. So I thought it was going to be sort of like essays from those people, but it's not. It's all pulled together by this woman, Natasha Lunn, and it's conversations with those people, as you would think, now based on the title, Conversations on Love. I really found this like really interesting, and it really does sort of do what it says on the tin in terms of celebrate all forms of love, from romantic love to love between sisters to love between friends to love for oneself to the absence of love and what grief is and things like that. Much of it made me happy, but a lot of it made me feel very sad. Like I said, there's stuff in there about grief and loss, and I found it very, very sad. And that's speaking of someone who has been relatively lucky in their lives so far, having only lost grandparents to death. So yeah, I felt a bit bummed out reading those bits, and I think maybe it was just a slight bit too long. I was reading it to start with, and literally, like, you can see turning over every single page with something in there thinking that's so true, or that's, I really agree with that, or that's so amazing. And then as it got towards the end, particularly, like, I didn't feel like I wanted to turn many pages over when I was reading the bit about grief and loss. Maybe it's just I found that bit too long, and that wasn't sort of tailored for myself. But had I experienced grief or loss, I think maybe I would have found it more valuable. I don't know. Don't want to tempt fate. Don't be pretending to fall over as he left the room. But yeah, this started off as a 4-star, and in the end I ended up giving it a 3-star, as I thought. So yeah, that was the last book that I read in July. August books. I was talking about this in my July reading vlog as well, because I started reading The Mermaid and Black Conch by Monique Roffey during July. I found this sort of enjoyable and highly readable. It's a story about a mermaid being caught by some American tourists who are out fishing, and they catch her, bring her back to the dock, and they've got big plans of like making loads of money from her and basically exploiting her. But also, before that even happens, they're assaulting her, abusing her, weeing on her. It's just awful. And a fisherman from the local village comes and rescues her and takes her to his house, and puts her in a bathtub, a bit like Splash. Do you remember Splash? She slowly turns back into a human, and you hear about her. So you're hearing from all these different points of view. You're hearing from David, the fisherman who rescues her. You're hearing from the American tourist. You're hearing from Akaya herself, the mermaid. And yeah, I found it sort of the different voices were done very well, and like Akaya herself speaks mainly in poetry and things like that, so I found they're very different voices throughout. There is loads in here. Excuse me, I don't know what that is. There's also loads in here about shagging and genitals, and where those genitals might be if you have a mermaid tail on, and curses that have covered up those genitals and things like that, which I found interesting. I also found interesting stuff in there about colonialisation, which I wasn't expecting to appear but did, and I probably found those bits more interesting. Was I sort of really swept away by the love story? Probably not. I gave it 3 stars. That's still a good rating for me. That means that I enjoyed it. So yeah, there we go. Next on to a 4-star book. This is Terminal Boredom by Izumi Suzuki. You may have seen me read the first story of this in the read a short story video that I made, because David's picked my TBR for the month and he actually included 3 short story collections, and I read a short story from the beginning of all of them, and really loved all of them actually. Haven't read any more, but decided to continue on with this, and these felt fresh, sort of relevant, and they felt really modern, which sort of bemused me a bit, because Izumi Suzuki died in 1986 and all of these stories obviously were written before her death, and like they just felt really relevant and really like fresh. I keep saying the word fresh, but I mean it. There was stories in there about gender, about technology, about all sorts. And honestly, it felt like a sort of Black Mirror episode. It felt like a blueprint for ideas about Black Mirror, and I really enjoyed them. I particularly enjoyed the stories in there about gender. The last story was written shortly before Izumi committed suicide, and it's called Terminal Boredom, and it's about trying to not be terminally bored anymore. I've crossed out, I've turned over this page, and I'm going to find this bit that I really wanted to read it to you. So I kept saying about how things felt really relevant, and this was weird because this also appeared in another book that I was reading in the short story collection video, and this is basically her sort of describing Instagram. So, above ground, the sun was beating down on the filthy town spread out before us. Unfettered spaces scare me. I'm not used to scenes that aren't in a frame. Looking at a picture inside a border always calms me down. Whether it's an Ultra Vista or the real thing, it's probably from all the TV. And like, there was something else that appeared in another short story collection. So like, I remember thinking Instagram was such an original idea, and I've read it in 2 short story collections, one that was written before 1986 and the other that was written before 1976. So yeah, maybe I should have come up with Instagram first. But yeah, really enjoyed this, thought it was really great. This really made me think as well about translators. So this is translated from Japanese, and there's so many sort of like turns of phrase in here that are so well, I read them as so English, and it just makes me think what that translator, let's name the translator. It doesn't always have, here we go. Oh, translated by many people. I don't think I've ever read a book that's been translated by many people. Polly Barton, Sam Bett, David Boyd, Daniel Joseph, Aiko Mashibuchi, and Helen O'Horan. It just really made me think about like the work they put into like replicating a story and making it accessible for the people that are reading it, while still keeping the original story there and still keeping the Japanese-ness, if that's a word, there. But yeah, I thought, God, just well done. Like in terms of like turns of phrase, colloquialism, slang, masterful. Yeah, really enjoyed this. Would highly recommend, next up, I listened to the audiobook of, however I've got the book here, of Homegoing by Ya Jessie. This also has appeared on a book, a video I made recently where I was talking about surely these books are going to be 5 stars. I've got such a pink chin there, I don't know what it is, maybe my makeup's rubbed off my face there. And I made a video about 5 books that I surely thought were going to be 5 stars. Now I've now listened to the audiobook of this, and I've given it 4 stars. 4 stars is a good rating for me, guys. It's really good rating. I really enjoyed it. But yeah, it didn't quite make it to a 5-star for me. Let's talk about the things I liked though. So this is sort of like, this is a huge book in terms of storyline, in terms of characters, in terms of the time it spans. You start off with 2 sisters, Effia and Essie. One of those sisters is sold into slavery, the other sister marries a slave trader, and then you hear about the generations of their families throughout time. Now, what I will say about listening to the audiobook was that I didn't have this, obviously, when you were listening to the audiobook. This is a family tree, so you see about who, like what side of the family they're on, or etc. And maybe because I was listening to it and I was trying to listen to like what, because it's almost like short stories in here, but like interlinked, but only like slightly. There wasn't like masses of mentioning the character that had happened, that had appeared in the story before, etc. I found I had to refer back to this a lot, and I think maybe that is why I made it a 4-star rather than a 5-star, because had I just been relying on the audiobook, I would have found it difficult to sort of place whose descendant this person was. But yeah, I feel like I've never really read anything like this. Like every single short story or character. It felt like a novel in itself, even though these were like 30 to 40 pages, but there was just so much sort of history and feeling and life in there. It was really, really beautifully written, and the audiobook was really, really gorgeously performed. I really, really enjoyed it. The generational like telling of these people's tales was masterful, really. Like, I feel like I've said masterful. Did I say masterful for Terminal Boredom? 2 masterful books. But yeah, I would use those words to describe these books. And yeah, I was sort of wowed by the whole thing. As I said, I was glad that I had a copy of the book because I could refer to where I was in the family tree of things, and I think I would have been a bit confused by it. But yeah, this really does live up to all the hype that surrounded it. And having read, oh my god, I forget the name of that book every time. What's the name of Yar Jessie's other book? Transcendent Kingdom, got there in the end. Loved that too. So yeah, I think this is like an amazing writer. Believe the hype, it was as good as it sounds it is. Sadly, the next book was not as good. The next book was a 1-star book. This is Where the Forest Meets the Stars by Glendy Vanderer, and this is the book club book that we were reading for my book club that I have with my friends over Facebook. This started up as a book club that I ran with lots of people over Facebook, and now it's got down to a very small group of people, and we now take it in turns to pick a book, and this book was picked by one of the other women in the book club. Now, when we always give each other a choice of 2, and I voted for the other one. The other one was, I can't think what it's called, but it's by it's the most recent book by the author who wrote The Martian, and I voted for that, and that didn't win, this did win. And when I heard the blurb, I was like, I am not gonna enjoy that. And then I had a hard time getting hold of it, and I had to buy it from Amazon because it's published by an Amazon publishing house. So yeah, so already when I got round to it, I weren't feeling it. But by the time I got into it, oh my god, I just really did not enjoy this. The character, so let me tell you how it is. So, it's about a character called Jo, who she's a cancer survivor, and she's moved to a remote area to do some work with birds, research with birds in this area that she's moved to. Now, the actual author herself, apparently, also has a history of ornithology. But I don't feel like, I feel like if they'd included any of that, maybe I would have got a little bit of enjoyment out of it. While she's working there, she's staying in this house. One night, a small child, a child that she ages around 8 or 9, turns up, claiming to be an alien from outer space, and she's been sent to Earth to see 5 miracles, and then she can return back to her life. So, if you just put that to one side for a bit, this child's turned up, no shoes on, pair of pyjamas, and saying she's here to see that. She just sort of accepts it. She makes a bit of a half-assed effort at the beginning of the book to sort of call the police, or maybe say, oh, is there a child missing? She looks on a few websites. But yeah, there's just no duty of care from her as an adult and this child who is missing, who is claiming to be an alien. It's not even like she really believes that she is an alien. She's just sort of like, oh, well. And doesn't, and like the little girl runs away when they try to call the police, so she just thinks, oh, I won't call the police again. She also gets romantically involved with somebody who lives close by, who is suffering from depression, and her view of depression is disgusting, to be honest. She was sort of like of the, have you tried not being depressed school of thought. She's thinking a bit of fresh air and a good shag will sort him out, and it does. So that's obviously the views of the author. So all of these things, like, I'm already not enjoying. Then I just get the vibe that this author is pro-guns, because there's this whole sort of like misplaced scene about having guns in the house and how Jo doesn't agree with having guns in the house, and then something happens and guns save the day, and then Jo's like, oh yeah, well, it probably is a good idea to have guns in the house. Like, this just, yeah, the gun totem was just too much. Yeah, it also, I just felt like it really needed a good edit. Sometimes I was reading pages and nothing was happening. God, I'm really slating this one, aren't I? And the ending felt really rushed. Do you want to know the ending? She ain't an alien. So that's the ending. Yeah. 1 star. Did not enjoy. Then the last 2 books I've read this first half of the month have been audiobooks. The first one was The AI Who Loved Me by Alyssa Cole. This is a sci-fi romance book by Alyssa Cole, who wrote When No One Is Watching, which is a book that David and I buddy read earlier this year. That's an enjoyable book, give that a go. That was about, she's obviously got quite the old range, Alyssa Cole, because that was about, it's like a thriller about gentrification, and a bit like Get Out, she says, having never watched Get Out, but that's what it says. Every review I've ever read about that book or seen, they say it's like Get Out. This is a romance story about a woman who falls in love with an AI robot, which is interesting. It was very short. I listened to the audiobook of it. The audiobook was really performed very well, actually. Regina King performed it, Mindy Kaling was in it, and I thought the whole sort of like celebrity cast was done quite well. But yeah, it was a bit short and sort of a bit lacking in detail, so there was no sort of like background to any of these stories, which I always find I need a little bit of background to get involved with these people. Yeah, there was lacking in plot and background, but very high in sort of descriptive but a bit dull detail. So yeah, I gave it a 2 star. I think the robot sex was probably the best thing about it, but it was just fine. So 2 stars. There was a cat in it called Tim. I like that as well. The last line I wrote in my review, and the cat called Tim, so I better mention him. And then the last book that I read, and I finished this today, it was another audiobook. It was A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. I really enjoyed this book. I gave this 4 stars. This is is it a middle grade or is it a young adult? What do you think? I'm sure many of you have read it, it's quite popular. This is a middle grade or a young adult book about a young girl called Adeline. The audio was lovely. It's set in Scotland, and the narrator had a lovely Scottish lilt. It was so soothing and calming and lovely to listen to, about a young girl who is autistic, and she also has a set of older twin sisters, and one of those sisters is autistic as well. And Adeline herself, has been struggling at school with a teacher who is horrific, and then some girls in her class who aren't being particularly kind. She's got a new friend who's new to the area. That was really lovely to hear. And she hears about the history of witches in the village that she lives in, and she wants there to be a memorial for these women who were tried as witches and killed. And the book sort of like loosely centres around that, but it's much more sort of character based than that. Adeline herself is lovely, and I found this really informative and interesting as somebody who doesn't know any autistic people, to read what it's like for this young girl who is autistic, and also her sister and things like that. I just found it really sort of informative and like really good. That's a bad word to describe books. But so after I'd sort of like felt educated myself having read this, I was looking at the reviews of this book on Goodreads, and what was even lovelier was reading the reviews from autistic people and from neurodivergent people, and saying what a good representation this book was and how wonderful it was and everything. So yeah, I was just left feeling very warm after finishing it. And the reason I got to this book, I'd heard about it before, but Jen recently read Elle's newer book, which I can't remember what it's called, but I've got a hold on it at the library. I'm going to actually read it rather than listen to the audiobook, although the audiobook of this was fantastic, as I said. And I saw that this other book was available to listen to on audio, so I did that. But yeah, loved it, thought it was brilliant, 4 stars, really enjoyed it. So those are the books that I've read in the first half of August. What have you guys read? Have you guys read any of these books that I've mentioned today? Hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you all again soon for another BookTube video. Goodbye!